The snow was falling softly that Christmas Eve, covering everything in a blanket of white. David pulled his old sedan into the grocery store parking lot, his daughter Sophie chattering excitedly in the back seat about Santa Claus and presents. She was 8 years old, and this would be their third Christmas without her mom. 3 years had passed since cancer took his wife away, but the holidays still felt incomplete somehow. "Dad, can we get the cookies with the red and green sprinkles?" Sophie asked, pressing her face against the window. "Sure, sweetheart." "Whatever you want," David replied, managing a smile. He'd been working extra shifts at the warehouse to make sure Sophie had a good Christmas. Money was tight, but seeing her happy made every long hour worth it. They grabbed what they needed from the store: milk, eggs, bread, and those Christmas cookies Sophie had her heart set on. David also picked up ingredients for the special breakfast he always made on Christmas morning. It was his wife's recipe, and he wanted to keep that tradition alive for Sophie. The drive home should have taken 15 minutes. Their neighborhood wasn't fancy, but it was safe and quiet. Families knew each other. Kids played together in the park. During Christmas, every house tried to outdo the next with decorations and lights. It was the kind of place where people still waved to their neighbors. As they turned onto Maple Street, something caught David's eye near the community park. At first, he thought it might be a dog or maybe someone's trash bag that had blown over. But then the shape moved, and his heart dropped into his stomach. It was a child, a little girl, hunched over one of the big green trash cans near the playground. "Dad, what's that girl doing?" Sophie asked from the back seat, her voice curious but concerned. David didn't answer right away. He was already slowing down, pulling the car toward the curb. The girl couldn't have been more than 6 or 7 years old. She wore a thin purple jacket that was way too light for this kind of weather. No hat, no gloves. Her small hands were red from the cold as she reached deep into the trash can, searching for something. "Stay in the car, baby. Keep the heat on." "I'll be right back," David said, putting the car in park, but leaving it running. "Is she okay?" Sophie asked, worry creeping into her voice. "I'm going to find out." David stepped out into the cold. The temperature had dropped below freezing, and his breath came out in white puffs. The park was empty, except for the little girl. Everyone else was home with their families, wrapping last-minute presents or preparing for tomorrow's celebrations. His footsteps crunched in the snow as he approached. He didn't want to startle her, so he cleared his throat gently when he was about 10 feet away. The girl's head snapped up. Her eyes went wide with fear, like a deer caught in headlights. She clutched something against her chest and took a step back. "Hey there," David said softly, keeping his distance. "I'm not going to hurt you. I promise." The girl didn't run, but she didn't relax either. She just stood there, shivering, holding whatever she'd found in the trash. Now that he was closer, David could see her face. She had dark circles under her eyes. Her cheeks were hollow. Her hair was tangled and hadn't been brushed in days, maybe longer. "Are you okay?" David asked. It was a stupid question. Obviously, she wasn't okay. What child digs through trash on Christmas Eve, if everything's fine? The girl didn't answer. She just stared at him with those big, scared eyes. "My name's David. What's your name?" For a long moment, she didn't speak. Then, in a voice so quiet he almost missed it, she whispered, "Rose." "Rose. That's a beautiful name," David said, crouching down to her level so he wouldn't seem so tall and intimidating. "Rose, can you tell me what you're looking for?" She hesitated, then slowly uncurled her arms to show him what she'd found. It was a sandwich, still partially wrapped in plastic. Someone had taken a few bites and thrown it away. The bread was a little soggy, but it was still mostly intact. David's chest tightened. This little girl was looking for food. On Christmas Eve, while his daughter sat in a warm car worried about cookies with sprinkles, this child was digging through garbage to find something to eat. "Are you hungry, Rose?" She nodded, just barely. "When was the last time you ate something?" Rose looked down at her feet. She wore sneakers that had holes in them. Her socks were wet from the snow. "Yesterday morning," she finally said. "I had some crackers. Yesterday morning." That was more than 30 hours ago. David felt anger rising in his chest. But not at Rose. At whoever was supposed to be taking care of this child. And clearly wasn't. "Where are your parents, sweetheart? Where's your mom? Or dad? Where?" Rose pointed across the street toward the old Riverside apartments. It was a run-down building that had seen better days. The landlord didn't take great care of it, but the rent was cheap, so families who were struggling often ended up there. "My mom's there," Rose said. "Is she sick?" Rose shrugged. "She sleeps a lot now. I tried to wake her up because I was hungry, but she wouldn't wake up. She's been sleeping for 2 days. 2 days." David felt his pulse quicken. Something was very wrong here. "What about your dad? Other family? Grandparents?" "Daddy left a long time ago. I don't have grandparents nearby." David glanced back at his car. Sophie had her face pressed against the window, watching everything. He held up one finger to tell her he needed one more minute. "Rose, I need to help your mom, okay? But first, let's get you something proper to eat. Not from the trash. Real food. Are you okay with that?" One. For the first time. Rose's expression changed. A tiny spark of hope flickered in her eyes. Really, I promise." David stood up slowly and extended his hand. Rose looked at it for a moment, then carefully placed her small, freezing hand in his. Her fingers felt like ice cubes. They walked back to the car, and David opened the back door. Sophie immediately scooted over to make room. "Hi, I'm Sophie. Do you want to share my cookies?" she asked, with the easy kindness that only children seem to possess. Rose climbed into the warm car, and David could see her whole body relax as the heat wrapped around her. He grabbed the blanket he kept in the trunk for emergencies and wrapped it around Rose's shoulders. "Let's get you some hot chocolate and real food, and then you're going to take me to your apartment, okay? We need to check on your mom." As he drove toward the convenience store a few blocks away, Rose began to talk more. Small details spilled out about how her mom used to make pancakes every Sunday, how they used to watch movies together, how things had been different before. Before what? David wasn't entirely sure yet, but he had a sinking feeling he was about to find out. What he didn't know was that knocking on Rose's apartment door in the next 20 minutes would change everything. Not just for Rose, but for his own family too. Sometimes, life puts people in your path for a reason, and sometimes, a single act of kindness on a cold Christmas Eve can save more than one life. But first, they needed to get Rose something to eat. And then, they needed to find out why her mother had been sleeping for 2 days straight. The convenience store was bright and warm, a welcome change from the freezing cold outside. Rose stayed close to David as they walked through the automatic doors, her small hand still gripping his coat. Sophie bounced alongside them, already chattering about which snacks Rose should try. "The chicken tenders are really good here," Sophie said. "And they have hot chocolate with extra marshmallows." David ordered food for Rose while she stood quietly, looking around like she couldn't quite believe this was happening. When the cashier handed her a steaming cup of hot chocolate topped with marshmallows, Rose's eyes went wide. She wrapped both hands around the cup, soaking in the warmth. They sat at one of the small tables near the window. Rose ate slowly at first, like she was afraid the food might disappear. Then hunger took over, and she devoured the chicken tenders and fries David had bought. Sophie shared her cookies, pushing the container across the table with a smile. "These are my favorite Christmas cookies," Sophie said. "The sprinkles taste like happiness." Rose managed a small smile at that. It was the first time David had seen her smile, and it broke his heart a little. She was just a kid. She should be excited about Christmas morning, not worried about where her next meal would come from. As Rose ate, David tried to learn more without pushing too hard. He asked gentle questions between bites. Where did she go to school? What grade was she in? Did she have friends in the building? Rose told him she was in first grade but hadn't been to school in a while. Her teacher's name was Miss Patterson, and she liked reading time best. She had one friend in her apartment building, a boy named Tommy, who lived on the second floor, but she hadn't seen him in days because she wasn't allowed to leave the apartment much anymore. Your mom told you to stay inside? David asked. Rose nodded. She said it was safer. The more Rose talked, the more worried David became. This wasn't just a parent having a bad day or a temporary rough patch. Something was seriously wrong. When Rose finished eating, David knelt down beside her chair. Rose, I need you to be really brave now. Okay? We need to go check on your mom. Can you show me which apartment is yours? Rose's expression changed. Fear crept back into her eyes. Is my mom in trouble? No, sweetheart. But if she's been sleeping for 2 days, she might be sick. And when people are sick, they need help. That's all we're going to do. Help her. They walked back to the car, and David drove the short distance to the Riverside apartments. The building looked even more run down up close. Some of the exterior lights were burned out. A broken shopping cart sat abandoned near the entrance. The whole place had an air of neglect about it. Rose led them to the 3rd floor. The stairwell smelled like old cigarette smoke and something else David couldn't quite identify. Dampness, maybe. The carpet in the hallway was stained and worn thin. They passed apartment 3B, where loud television sounds echoed through the door. Rose stopped at 3D. The number on the door hung crooked, barely attached by one screw. This is it, she whispered. David knocked. Hello? This is David Chen from down the street. I have your daughter Rose with me. I'm just checking to make sure everything's okay. No answer. He knocked again, louder this time. Ma'am? Can you come to the door, please? Still nothing. Sophie stood close to her dad, sensing the tension in the air. Rose looked up at David, with worried eyes. She won't answer, Rose said. She never answers anymore when I knock. How do you get in, sweetheart? Rose pointed to the doormat. It was old and frayed, with welcome printed in faded letters. She bent down and lifted the corner, revealing a brass key underneath. David hesitated. He knew he was about to cross a line. Walking into someone's home without permission wasn't something he took lightly. But a child had been digging through trash for food. Her mother hadn't responded in days. If he walked away now and something terrible happened, he'd never forgive himself. Okay, he said quietly. He took the key from Rose and unlocked the door. The apartment was freezing. Colder inside than it was outside. If that was even possible. David's breath fogged in the air as he stepped through the doorway. The heat had been shut off completely. The place was small. A living room that connected to a tiny kitchen. He could see one bedroom door and a bathroom. The furniture was minimal. A couch that had seen better days. A small television on a cardboard box. No Christmas decorations. No tree. Nothing to indicate that tomorrow was supposed to be a day of celebration. But what caught David's attention immediately was the woman on the couch. She lay motionless, covered by a thin blanket. Her face was pale, almost gray. Empty pill bottles littered the coffee table beside her. At least 5 or 6 of them, all tipped over and open. Sophie, take Rose into the hallway right now, David said, his voice sharp with urgency. But Dad, now, Sophie. Please. Sophie grabbed Rose's hand and pulled her back toward the door. David rushed to the couch and checked for a pulse. It was there. Faint, but steady. The woman was breathing, but barely. Her breaths were shallow and slow. David pulled out his phone and dialed 911, his hands shaking. 911, what's your emergency? I need an ambulance at the Riverside Apartments on Maple Street, apartment 3D. 3rd floor. I have an unresponsive woman, possible overdose. Multiple empty pill bottles. She's breathing but unconscious. The dispatcher started asking questions, and David answered as best he could while checking the pill bottles. Pain medication, sleeping pills, anxiety medication, all prescribed to someone named Jennifer Hayes, all empty or nearly empty. How long has she been unconscious? Her daughter says 2 days, but I just found them. I don't know for sure. Is the child safe? Yes, she's with me in the hallway. Paramedics are 3 minutes away. Stay on the line with me. David went back to the hallway where Sophie had wrapped her arms around Rose. The little girl was crying now, tears streaming down her face. Is my mom going to die? Rose asked, her voice breaking. David knelt down and pulled both girls close. The ambulance is coming. They're going to help her. The doctors are really good at helping people. Okay? But even as he said it, David didn't know if he was telling the truth. He had no idea how long Jennifer had been like this, or how much medication she'd taken. All he knew was that Rose had been alone in that freezing apartment with her unconscious mother for 2 days. Scared and hungry, trying to survive on her own. The sound of sirens grew louder, and within minutes, paramedics were rushing up the stairs with their equipment. David moved the girls further down the hallway as the emergency team went to work. He could hear their urgent voices, the beeping of machines, the crackle of radios calling for backup. One of the paramedics, a woman with kind eyes, came out to talk to him. Are you family? No. I found her daughter searching through trash for food. The girl said her mom had been sleeping for days. I brought her home and found this. The paramedic nodded grimly. We're transporting her to County General. She's alive, but it's serious. Are you able to stay with the child? Yes, of course. Child Protective Services will need to be contacted. They'll meet you at the hospital. Those words hung in the air like a weight. Child Protective Services, foster care, systems, and paperwork, and strangers. David looked down at Rose, who was clinging to Sophie like a lifeline, and felt his heart break all over again. The paramedics wheeled Jennifer out on a stretcher, an oxygen mask over her face and IVs already started in her arms. Rose watched her mother disappear down the stairs, and the sound of her crying was something David knew he'd never forget. Christmas Eve had turned into something none of them could have imagined. And David realized this was only the beginning of a very long night. The hospital waiting room smelled like antiseptic and old coffee. David sat between the two girls, Rose on his left and Sophie on his right. It was almost midnight now. Christmas Eve was slipping away, replaced by fluorescent lights and the steady beep of machines down distant hallways. Rose hadn't said much since they arrived. She just sat there, swimming in one of Sophie's oversized sweatshirts that David had grabbed from the car, staring at the floor. Every time a doctor or nurse walked by, her head would snap up, hope and fear mixing in her eyes. Sophie had fallen asleep against David's shoulder about 20 minutes ago. She'd tried so hard to stay awake, to keep Rose company. But exhaustion had finally won. David was tired too. But his mind wouldn't stop racing. He kept replaying everything in his head. The trash can, the empty apartment, Jennifer's pale face, those pill bottles. A woman in a gray pantsuit approached them, carrying a clipboard. She looked tired too, like she'd been working long past when she should have gone home. David supposed emergencies didn't care about holidays. Mr. Chen, she said quietly, probably trying not to wake Sophie. David nodded. That's me. I'm Mrs. Lin from Child Protective Services. I need to talk with you about Rose's situation. Rose's head jerked up at the sound of her name. Her eyes went wide. Is my mom okay? Rose asked, her voice small and scared. Mrs. Lin's expression softened. She crouched down in front of Rose, so they were at eye level. Your mom is alive, honey. The doctors are taking care of her right now. She's going to be in the hospital for a while, but she's going to be okay. Relief washed over Rose's face. But it was quickly replaced by new worry. Can I see her? Can I see her? Not tonight, sweetheart. Maybe in a day or two, when she's feeling better. Right now, she needs to rest and let the medicine help her. What happened to her? Rose asked. Mrs. Lynn glanced at David, as if asking for help with this conversation. David had been wondering the same thing. How do you explain addiction to a 6-year-old? How do you make sense of something that doesn't make sense even to adults? Your mom has been very sad and in a lot of pain, Mrs. Lynn said carefully. Sometimes when people hurt that much, they make choices that aren't good for them. The medicine she took was supposed to help her feel better, but she took too much. Because she was sad? Rose asked. Yes, honey. Very, very sad. But the good news is that now she's going to get help for that sadness. There are people who know how to help people feel better in the right way. Rose seemed to think about this for a moment. Then, she asked the question David knew was coming. Where am I going to go? This was the part David had been dreading. Mrs. Lynn pulled up a chair and sat down, setting her clipboard aside. Well, that's what I need to talk to Mr. Chen about. Rose, do you have any family? Grandparents, aunts, uncles? Anyone like that? Rose shook her head. My grandma lives far away. I only talked to her on the phone once. Do you know your grandma's name? Grandma Betty. But Mama said we can't call her because they had a fight. Mrs. Lynn made a note on her clipboard. Okay, we'll try to find Grandma Betty. But tonight, you need somewhere safe to stay. Mr. Chen found you and helped you, which was very kind of him. Usually, we would place you with a foster family until your mom is better. What's a foster family? Rose asked. It's a family that takes care of kids when their parents can't for a little while. They're nice people who want to help. Rose's bottom lip started to tremble. Will they be strangers? At first, yes. But they would take good care of you. A tear rolled down Rose's cheek. Then another. She turned to David, grabbing his hand with both of hers. Please don't make me go with strangers. Please. I'll be good. I promise I'll be really, really good. David felt his chest tighten. Sophie, who had woken up during the conversation, wrapped her arm around Rose. Dad, can't she stay with us? Sophie asked. It's Christmas. She shouldn't be with strangers on Christmas. David looked at Mrs. Lynn. Is that even possible? Mrs. Lynn studied him for a long moment. It's complicated. We'd need to run background checks, do a home visit, verify references. Usually that takes time. But there must be emergency provisions, right? For situations like this? There are, but I'd need to verify everything tonight. Check your background. Make sure there are no red flags. She paused. Have you ever had any interactions with CPS before? Any criminal record? No. Nothing like that. I'm a warehouse supervisor. I've lived in the same house for 8 years. I coach youth soccer. I can give you references. Mrs. Lynn tapped her pen against her clipboard, thinking, You have a daughter the same age? That's good. 2-bedroom house? 3 bedrooms, actually. My wife passed away 3 years ago. Cancer. It's just been Sophie and me since then. Something in Mrs. Lynn's expression shifted. Maybe it was the mention of loss. Maybe she saw something in David that made her trust him. Or maybe it was just that it was Christmas Eve, and the idea of taking a traumatized little girl to a stranger's house didn't sit right with her either. Wait here, she said, standing up. Let me make some calls. She walked away, phone already to her ear. David sat there, with both girls pressed against him, wondering what he'd just gotten himself into. 24 hours ago, his biggest concern was whether he'd bought enough wrapping paper. Now he was potentially taking in a child he'd met just a few hours earlier. Dad, we have to help her, Sophie whispered. We have to. David looked down at his daughter. She had her mother's heart. When his wife was sick, even as a little girl, Sophie had wanted to help everyone in the cancer ward. She'd make cards for the other patients. She'd share her toys with kids in the waiting room. She understood something that some adults never learned. That kindness mattered most when things were hardest. I know, sweetheart, David said. We're going to try. Mrs. Lynn came back 20 minutes later with papers in her hand. Okay. I pulled some strings. You're already in the system because of your soccer coaching clearances. That helps. I called your references, got verification on your background check. Everything came back clean. So, what does that mean? David asked. It means if you're willing, Rose can stay with you on an emergency placement basis through the holidays. We'll do a formal home visit the day after Christmas. But Mr. Chen, I need to be very clear. This is temporary. We're going to work on finding Rose's grandmother or other family members. And Rose's mother will need to complete treatment and prove she can provide a safe home. This isn't adoption. This is emergency care. Do you understand? End quote. I understand, David said. Mrs. Lin turned to Rose. Rose, Mr. Chen and his daughter have agreed to let you stay with them for a little while. Is that okay with you? Letter 4. Rose looked up at David with those big eyes. Really? I can stay with you and Sophie? If you want to, yes, David said. Rose threw her arms around him and started crying again. But this time, they weren't tears of fear. They were tears of relief. Sophie joined the hug, and David found himself holding two little girls who desperately needed someone to hold them. Mrs. Lin had them sign papers. A lot of papers. She went over rules and requirements, scheduled the home visit for December 26th, and gave David her direct phone number in case of emergencies. She also gave him information about Jennifer's condition and when Rose might be able to visit. Before they left, one of the nurses came out with an update. Jennifer had been stabilized and moved to the psychiatric unit. She would be evaluated in the morning and start treatment for substance abuse and depression. It would be a long road, but she was alive. She had a chance. As David led the girls out to his car, the first light of Christmas morning was just starting to break on the horizon. Rose held Sophie's hand on one side, and David's on the other. Are you hungry? David asked. We could stop and get breakfast. Rose nodded. Could we have pancakes? My mom used to make pancakes on Christmas morning. Pancakes it is, David said, his voice thick with emotion. He had no idea what he was doing. He had no idea how this would all work out. But as he looked at Rose's face, finally showing something other than fear and sadness, he knew he'd made the right choice. Sometimes you don't plan to be someone's hero. Sometimes you just show up when you're needed most. And sometimes that's enough. The diner was one of the few places open on Christmas morning. Red and green tinsel hung from the ceiling, and a small, artificial tree blinked in the corner. The place was mostly empty, except for a few other families and some people who worked night shifts grabbing breakfast before heading home. David ordered a stack of pancakes for each girl and coffee for himself. He watched as Rose poured syrup over her pancakes with the kind of focus that made it seem like the most important task in the world. She was still wearing Sophie's oversized sweatshirt, and her hair was a mess. But there was color in her cheeks now. She didn't look quite so hollow anymore. My mom puts chocolate chips in the pancakes sometimes, Rose said quietly, cutting a small bite. When we have them. Gooding. After was. Maybe we can make those tomorrow, Sophie suggested. We have chocolate chips at home. Rose's face lit up. Really? Really? David confirmed, though his mind was already racing ahead to all the things he needed to figure out. Rose would need clothes, a toothbrush, a proper bed to sleep in, instead of the couch. He'd have to explain to his mother-in-law why there was suddenly another child in the house. He'd have to figure out how to tell his boss he might need some time off. But first, they needed to get through today. After breakfast, they drove to David's house. It was a modest, 3-bedroom home in a quiet neighborhood. Christmas lights still twinkled on the roof, even in the early morning light. David had put them up 3 weeks ago, standing on a ladder while Sophie supervised from below, shouting encouragement. Inside, the Christmas tree stood in the living room corner, presents scattered underneath. David had stayed up late on Christmas Eve, wrapping everything, just like he did every year. He'd been so focused on making sure Sophie had a good Christmas that he'd never imagined it would turn out like this. Rose stopped in the doorway, staring at the tree. "It's so pretty," she whispered. "Come on, I'll show you where you can sleep," David said gently. He led Rose upstairs to the spare bedroom. It had been his wife's office once, then a storage room. Now it was mostly empty, except for some boxes and a daybed they used when family visited. It wasn't much, but it would work. Sophie immediately started making plans. "We can share my stuffed animals, and I have extra blankets with butterflies on them." "Do you like butterflies?" Rose nodded, still looking overwhelmed by everything. "Why don't you girls pick out some clothes for Rose from Sophie's room?" David suggested. "Something comfortable she can wear today." While the girls went through Sophie's dresser, David stood in the hallway and pulled out his phone. He had to call someone. He couldn't do this alone. He scrolled through his contacts and hit dial. "Hello?" His mother-in-law's voice was groggy with sleep. "Helen, it's David. I'm sorry to call so early. Is everything okay? Is Sophie all right?" "Sophie's fine. But something happened last night. I need to tell you about it." David explained everything. Finding Rose in the park, the apartment, the hospital, the decision to take her in. Helen listened without interrupting, which was one of the things he'd always appreciated about her. When he finished, there was a long pause. David felt his throat tighten. He still missed his wife. Every single day. "I didn't know what else to do. You did exactly the right thing." "What do you need from me?" "I have no idea what I'm doing, Helen. I don't know anything about foster care or how to help a kid who's been through trauma. I'm barely keeping it together with Sophie sometimes, but you are keeping it together. You've been an amazing father to Sophie since we lost Claire, and you'll figure this out too. I'll come over this afternoon with some supplies. We'll get through this like we get through everything. One day at a time." After hanging up, David felt a little less overwhelmed. Helen had always been his rock. After Claire died, she'd taught him how to braid Sophie's hair. She'd shown him which medicines to give for which symptoms. She'd been there for every school event and every hard day. He didn't know what he would have done without her. Back downstairs, the girls had settled in front of the TV, watching a Christmas movie. Rose sat stiffly at first, like she wasn't sure if she was allowed to relax. But gradually, Sophie's easy comfort rubbed off on her, and she started to lean back into the couch cushions. Around noon, David made grilled cheese sandwiches for lunch. Rose ate 2 of them. He couldn't remember the last time he'd been so happy to see a child eat. The doorbell rang at 2 o'clock. Helen arrived with 3 shopping bags full of clothes, pajamas, and toiletries she'd picked up from the store. She also brought ingredients for Christmas dinner and a small wrapped present. "Every child should have something to open on Christmas," Helen said, setting the gift on the coffee table. Rose stared at the present like it might disappear if she looked away. "That's for me?" "Of course it's for you, sweetheart. Go ahead. Open it." With shaking hands, Rose tore off the wrapping paper. Inside was a stuffed teddy bear, soft and brown with a red ribbon around its neck. Rose hugged it to her chest and started crying again. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you so much." Helen pulled Rose into a hug. "You're very welcome, honey." That afternoon, something unexpected happened. Rose started to open up. She told them about her school, about her friend Tommy in the apartment building, about the stories her mom used to read to her at bedtime. She talked about the time before everything got bad, when her dad was still around and money wasn't so tight. She also talked about watching her mom change. How her mom got hurt in a car accident and started taking medicine that made her sleepy. How she stopped going to work. How the lights got turned off, and then the heat. How scared Rose had been. Not understanding what was happening. Just knowing something was very wrong. David listened to all of it, his heart breaking for this little girl who'd been carrying so much fear and confusion all by herself. That evening, David called the hospital to check on Jennifer. She was awake now, they told him. She was devastated about what had happened and asking about her daughter. The nurse gave him a number for the psychiatric unit so he could talk to Jennifer's social worker about arranging a visit. Later, after both girls were in their pajamas and settled in watching another Christmas movie, David stepped outside onto the back porch. The night was cold and clear, stars visible in the dark sky. He thought about how different this Christmas had turned out from what he'd planned. His phone buzzed. A text from Mrs. Lynn. "Just checking in. How's Rose doing?" David typed back. "She's okay. She ate well. Starting to talk more. Thank you for trusting me with her." The response came quickly. "You're doing a good thing. I'll see you on the 26th for the home visit. Merry Christmas, Mr. Chen." David went back inside to find both girls had fallen asleep on the couch, Rose clutching her new teddy bear and Sophie's arm draped protectively over her. The movie still played softly on the TV, casting flickering light across their peaceful faces. He thought about Jennifer, alone in a hospital room, facing the consequences of her choices, but also getting help. He thought about Rose, who'd been surviving on her own for days, but was now safe and warm. He thought about Sophie, who'd welcomed a stranger into their home with such open-hearted kindness. David carefully carried Rose upstairs and tucked her into the daybed, placing the teddy bear next to her pillow. Then he went back for Sophie, carrying her to her own room. As he pulled the blankets up around his daughter, Sophie's eyes fluttered open. "Dad?" she mumbled sleepily. "Yeah, sweetheart. This was the best Christmas ever." David smiled, kissing her forehead. "Get some sleep, baby." As he turned off the lights and headed to his own room, David realized something. He'd spent 3 years trying to fill the hole Claire's death had left in their lives. Trying to be enough for Sophie. Trying to keep their little family going. He'd been so focused on what they'd lost that he'd forgotten about what they still had to give. Sometimes the best gifts aren't the ones wrapped under a tree. Sometimes they're the ones you never saw coming. The ones that find you when you're just trying to do the right thing. The ones that remind you that even in the darkest moments, there's still light to be found. Rose had found them searching through trash on a cold Christmas Eve. But maybe, in some way, they'd found each other. And maybe that was exactly what all of them needed. 3 days after Christmas, David sat in a small meeting room at County General Hospital. Jennifer sat across from him, looking like a completely different person than the unconscious woman he'd found on the couch. She was awake and alert now, but her eyes were red from crying. Her hands shook slightly as she held a cup of water. "I don't know how to thank you," Jennifer said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You saved my daughter's life. You saved my life." David shifted in his chair, uncomfortable with the gratitude. "No." Jennifer shook her head firmly. "Most people would have driven past. Most people wouldn't have cared. But you stopped. You helped Rose when she needed someone most. And despite var, you would have dynastonware. No. I money won." There was a long pause. David could hear the distant sounds of the hospital. Footsteps in the hallway. A page over the intercom. The hum of fluorescent lights. "What happened, Jennifer?" David asked gently. "How did things get so bad?" "Jennifer? How did things get so bad?" Jennifer took a shaky breath. "I was a nurse. Did you know that? Worked at Memorial Hospital for 6 years. I loved my job. I was good at it." She paused, staring down at her hands. "About 2 years ago, Rose's father left us. Just packed his bags one day and said he couldn't do it anymore. The bills, the responsibility, all of it. He left and never looked back." David listened quietly, not interrupting. "I was angry at first. Then I was determined. I thought I could handle everything on my own. I picked up extra shifts, double shifts, night shifts, whatever I could get to make ends meet. Rose stayed with a babysitter, or sometimes my neighbor would watch her. It was hard, but we were managing. Then, about 8 months ago, I was driving home from a night shift. I was exhausted. A truck ran a red light and hit my car. Jennifer's voice cracked. Number seeing. Red light. Number seeing. Number seeing. Number seeing. I broke 3 ribs, fractured my wrist, and messed up my back. The pain was unbearable. They gave me prescriptions. Strong ones. They helped at first. David could see where this was going, and his heart ached for her. I went back to work too soon because I couldn't afford to take more time off. But I was in so much pain, so I kept taking the pills. Then, I needed more to feel normal. Before I knew it, I was taking them not just for pain, but to get through the day. To sleep. To function. She wiped her eyes. I lost my job 4 months ago. Failed a random drug test. After that, everything fell apart. No income. Bills piling up. I was too ashamed to ask for help. Too proud to admit I had a problem. What about family? David asked. Rose mentioned a grandmother. My mother. Betty. We had a fight years ago over Rose's father. She didn't approve of him. And when we got married anyway, she cut me off. I was too stubborn to reach out, even when I needed help. Jennifer's voice broke completely. I let my daughter dig through trash for food because I was too ashamed to call my own mother. What kind of person does that make me? It makes you human, David said quietly. Jennifer looked up at him with such raw pain in her eyes. I don't deserve Rose. I don't deserve another chance. Maybe not, David said honestly. But Rose deserves a mother who's healthy and present, and you can be that person. You're getting help now. That's what matters. Over the next few weeks, a lot changed. Mrs. Lynn had tracked down Betty, Jennifer's mother, who lived 3 states away in Ohio. When Betty heard what had happened, she immediately booked a flight. The reunion between mother and daughter at the hospital was tearful and healing. Betty had her own regrets about the years they'd lost to stubbornness and pride. Jennifer was transferred to a residential treatment facility where she would spend the next 90 days working on her recovery. It wasn't going to be easy, but she was committed. She had to be. For Rose. For herself. David brought Rose to visit her mother twice a week. The first visit was hard. Rose clung to David's hand, scared and uncertain. But when Jennifer pulled her daughter into her arms and apologized through tears, something began to heal between them. I'm so sorry, baby, Jennifer had whispered into Rose's hair. Mommy made some really bad choices, but I'm going to get better. I promise you, I'm going to get better. Rose had cried too, but she'd hugged her mother back. During those weeks, Rose stayed with David and Sophie. Something unexpected happened. She became part of their family, not in a way that replaced Jennifer, but in a way that expanded what family could mean. Rose started going to school again. David enrolled her in the same school Sophie attended, and the girls rode the bus together every morning. Rose's teacher, Miss Patterson, was thrilled to have her back and worked with David to help Rose catch up on missed work. Helen became like a grandmother to Rose, just as she was to Sophie. She taught both girls how to bake cookies. She braided their hair before school. She read them bedtime stories when David worked late. The neighborhood kids welcomed Rose into their group. She started playing in the park again, but this time, not searching through trash. This time, she was on the swings, laughing, and being a kid. David watched her transform over those weeks. The hollow look in her eyes gradually disappeared. She smiled more, laughed more, started to trust that food would be there when she was hungry, that the heat would stay on, that the adults in her life would show up. But David also made sure Rose stayed connected to her mother. They talked on the phone every other day. They sent letters and drawings. Jennifer was working hard in treatment, facing her addiction and her past, learning how to be healthy again. Betty moved from Ohio to be closer to Jennifer and Rose. She rented a small apartment near David's neighborhood and started looking for work. She attended family counseling sessions with Jennifer, working through their old wounds. 4 months after that Christmas Eve, Jennifer completed her treatment program. She was clean, healthy, and ready to start rebuilding her life. Betty had found her a part-time job at a medical supply company, something that didn't require her nursing license but used her medical knowledge. It wasn't much, but it was a start. The day came when Rose needed to go back home. David had known it was coming, but that didn't make it any easier. He'd grown to love Rose like she was his own daughter. Sophie was heartbroken at the thought of losing her sister. They all met at Betty's apartment. Jennifer was there, looking healthier than David had ever seen her. Her eyes were clear. Her hands were steady. She'd gained weight and looked like herself again. Rose ran to her mother, and Jennifer scooped her up, holding her tight. "I missed you so much, baby." "I missed you too, Mama." David stood back, watching the reunion with mixed emotions. He was happy for them, truly happy, but he was also sad. Rose had become part of his heart. Jennifer came over to him, still holding Rose. "I don't have the words to thank you properly. You gave me a second chance. You gave Rose a safe place when she needed it most. You're the reason we're both still here. You did the hard work," David said. "You chose to get better. Can I tell you something?" Jennifer asked, her eyes serious. "Of course. Years ago, I was a nurse at Memorial Hospital. I worked in the oncology unit." She paused. "I took care of your wife, Claire." David's breath caught. "What?" "She was one of my patients. I remember you and Sophie. You used to bring Sophie to visits, and she'd draw pictures for the other patients. Claire talked about you all the time, about how much she loved you both, about how worried she was about leaving you." Jennifer's eyes filled with tears. "She made me promise something. She made me promise that if I ever saw someone who needed help, I'd do whatever I could to help them. Because she said that's what you'd taught her. That kindness matters most when things are hardest." David couldn't speak. He remembered Jennifer now. The kind nurse who'd held Claire's hand during the worst days, who'd brought coloring books for Sophie, who'd stayed late just to talk when Claire couldn't sleep. "I broke that promise when I let my addiction take over," Jennifer continued. "I stopped helping people. I couldn't even help myself. But you kept that promise. Even though Claire is gone, you kept living the way she would have wanted. You saved my daughter. And in doing that, you saved me too." The truth of it all settled over David like a wave. Life had a strange way of coming full circle. Jennifer had been there for his family when they needed help most, and years later, he'd been there for hers. "So what happens now?" David asked, his voice rough with emotion. Jennifer smiled. "Now, I keep showing up. I stay clean. I be the mother Rose deserves. I rebuild my life one day at a time, and we stay in touch." Betty added, "We're family now. Maybe not by blood, but by everything that matters." Sophie, who'd been quiet this whole time, suddenly spoke up. "Can Rose still come over to play? Can we still be sisters?" Jennifer laughed through her tears. "Of course. Rose talks about you every single day." So that's what they did. They stayed in touch. Rose and Sophie had playdates every week. David and Jennifer and Betty formed an unusual extended family, built on second chances and hard-earned grace. A year later, on Christmas Eve, both families gathered at David's house for dinner. Jennifer had been clean for 16 months. She'd gotten her nursing license reinstated and was working part-time at a clinic. Betty had become the grandmother both girls had always needed. Rose was thriving in school, her smile bright and genuine. As they sat around the dinner table, David looked at the faces surrounding him. His daughter, Sophie, who'd taught him that kindness was never wasted. Rose, who'd survived more than any child should have to, but was learning to trust again. Jennifer, who'd fought her way back from the edge. Betty, who'd learned that pride wasn't worth losing your family. And Helen, who'd been his anchor through everything. "I want to make a toast," David said, raising his glass. "A year ago tonight, I found a little girl searching through trash. I thought I was saving her, but the truth is, She saved me too. She reminded me that broken things can be fixed, that second chances are real. That family isn't just who you're born to, it's who shows up when things fall apart. Everyone raised their glasses. To second chances, Jennifer said. To family, Betty added. To being sisters forever, Sophie and Rose said together. And as they clinked glasses and laughed and shared a meal, David realized something. Life rarely turns out the way you plan. Sometimes it throws you tragedies that seem unbearable. Sometimes it puts strangers in your path who become family. Sometimes the worst moments lead to the most beautiful new beginnings. That Christmas Eve, when he'd pulled over to help a little girl in need, he couldn't have imagined where it would lead. But now, surrounded by love and laughter and people who'd become his family, he wouldn't change a single moment of it. Because sometimes, the greatest gifts come wrapped in the most unexpected packages. And sometimes, one small act of kindness can change everything.